Is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As we continue with the broadcast premiere of Here's to Flint, a new documentary produced by the ACLU of Michigan by Michigan Journalist of the Year, Kurt Guyette, and filmmaker Kate Levy.
Distrustful of the city and the state, Leanne Walters, with the help of the EPA's Del Toro, connected with Virginia Tech professor Mark Edwards. Edwards helped Walters and Del Toro conduct a full analysis of the water flowing into her home. Here's Mark Edwards.
They were the worst results we've seen in 25 years. So bad, at first we didn't believe it. The levels got as high as 13,500 parts per billion, which is about 10,000 times higher than recommended levels, the maximum levels. 2.5 times hazardous waste levels of lead. It's not even corrosion 101 to realize that water is going to cause this problem. If anyone had looked at this who was reasonably competent for 5 minutes, they would have predicted that this would have occurred.
Whose water is it? Our water. Whose water is it? Our water. All right.
By the middle of June, the city was wrapping up federally mandated drinking water sampling. Flint was very much in danger of exceeding federal safe water standards. The Michigan Department of Environmental Quality, which analyzes those samples, began warning Flint officials that its water supply was in danger of violating lead and copper standards. State MDEQ officials wrote, "We hope you have 61 more lead copper samples collected and sent to the lab, and that they will be below the action level for lead. As of now, with 39 results, Flint is over the action level for lead. If any more high lead samples were collected, the city would be out of compliance, forcing it to start spending millions of dollars to replace lead service lines throughout Flint." Given that warning, the city focused on testing homes it knew would produce low lead results. Consequently, all of the remaining homes sampled came in below the action level for lead. Also in June, based on test results from Leanne Walters' home, the EPA's Del Toro wrote an internal memo sounding the alarm about lead in Flint's water, warning that it should be a major concern from a public health standpoint. Feeling a sense of urgency to make the issue public, Del Toro broke EPA protocol by giving a copy of the memo to Walters. She shared it with the ACLU of Michigan, which published the memo in early July. In response, the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality completely denied there was any problem with lead in Flint's drinking water, even though all the warning signs were clear and evidence of contamination was mounting.
Anyone who is concerned about lead in the drinking water in Flint can relax. There is no broad problem right now that we've seen with lead in the drinking water in Flint.
But the person who sounded the warning, the EPA's Del Toro, was no longer available for comment. And here's Edwards.
MDEQ told Ms. Walters that Mr. Del Toro had been handled and that he would no longer be able to work on the Flint water situation. So when I heard that, I grew quite concerned because scientifically, you know, there wasn't just smoke here, there was fire here.
Early July, Flint residents and clean water activists from across the state tried to take their concerns directly to the governor.
My name is Kim Redigan, and I'm a member of the People's Water Board Coalition. And in July, a group of us attempted to take our concerns about the water situation in Flint and beyond directly to the governor's office.
I mean, what did you do?
We sent a registered letter asking for the governor to come to Flint. We have people from all over the state of Michigan here. We're representing several cities.
No, we have
and
people
we got
from
a terse response 2 weeks later, simply saying the governor's busy and cannot meet with you. So we're going to be persistent until we do have a meeting. I mean, it would be very good to, talk to the person who handles the governor's calendar.
Okay, because I really to file and do what we were supposed to have a request. That was denied. You've come in. I've come out and tried to speak to you people, and excuse me, you people. So with that being said, I am more than happy to accept what you would like to give to the governor, and I'll be more than happy to pass it.
In the face of official denials, the question became how to get to the truth. The answer was to conduct an independent, scientifically rigorous, and citizen-led study of Flint's water. Mark Edwards applied for an emergency grant from the National Science Foundation. Test kits were sent to Flint in August. On the ground in Flint were the ACLU of Michigan and Flint's Coalition for Clean Water, a diverse grassroots group of organizations that had come together in the spring of 2015. Operating from the basement of the Saints of God Church, they began the work of distributing and collecting water samples from 300 homes.
My name is Naira Sharif. I am the coordinator for the Flint Democracy Defense League. This week we're going to get these kits out to the community and they can test and we'll know for sure what's in our water.
Citizens ensured the most scientifically valid and geographically broad sampling was conducted.
You know, scientifically, we couldn't have done it any better ourselves. They implemented training procedures that I think the city and EPA should be using around the country.
So after 45 seconds, you're going to fill up the medium-sized bottle, and then when that's full, you're going to take the bottle out and then wait for 2 minutes with the water still flowing.
They also implemented procedures to prevent tampering with the samples because they knew that that might be raised as a possible concern. And they were right.
We want to have zero reason for anyone to question what we've done here.
What we did when we picked up samples from people, we had them initial near the seam, and then we taped up everything in front of them, so the initials are under the tape, so that the resident would know that their sample hasn't been touched by anybody but them, and Virginia Tech also knows that.
I thought no one would claim people would put lead in the water samples to fake that there was high lead in water, but people from the state said that to me.
In addition to supplying and analyzing test kits for the citizen-led study, Edwards also loaded up a minivan with students and drove to Flint for 2 days of additional on-site testing. As Edwards conducted tests at various homes, new concerns were raised.
So that's chlorine. So there's just none in the water here.
Drink it.
So there's no disinfectant.
Which I was questioning the Legionnaire's disease. Is that a possibility with the water? Is it only in...
Legionnaire's disease can sometimes come from water. People do sometimes get it in their showers.
I mean, we have to bathe in it. We do cook with it. We have this one here who gets sores all over his body. He's on antibiotic and antibiotic ointment right now. They all have just gone through pneumonia in the middle of summer, which, according to the hospital, is extremely rare.
I haven't sampled at a house that has any chlorine yet.
5 months later, the state disclosed for the first time that the number of Legionnaire's cases in and around Flint began spiking dramatically in the months after the switch to the river. Since June 2014, 87 people have contracted the rare pneumonia-like disease. 10 have died. As soon as the first sample kits began arriving back at Virginia Tech, their analysis showed alarming levels of lead. Feeling morally compelled to immediately address an apparent public health crisis, Edwards and his team began contacting residents with results and posting information on a newly created website. As the results were revealed, the state continued to publicly claim that the water was safe. For example, Brad Werfel told Michigan Radio, "The samples don't match the testing that we've been doing in the same kind of neighborhoods all over the city for the past year." But at the same time, the governor's office secretly arranged for an unnamed donor to purchase 1,500 water filters that were handed out to Flint families on September 1st. In a city with a majority African-American population, a poverty rate of 40%, and average water bills of $150 a month, people had few options. As Virginia Tech continued to analyze samples and post results, state officials responded by attacking the credibility of Edwards and his team. In an email to a Flint Journal reporter, the MDEQ's Brad Werfel claimed this group specializes in looking for high lead problems. They pull that rabbit out of that hat everywhere they go. They've just arrived in town, fanning political flames irresponsibly. Residents of Flint concerned about the health of their community don't need more of that. On September 15th, members of the Coalition for Clean Water, which led the effort to collect sample kits throughout the city, held a press conference to discuss Virginia Tech's analysis of water from 277 Flint homes, 4 times as many homes tested by the city and state in the previous 6 months.
We estimate that the water in about 5,000 Flint homes is over standards set by the World Health Organization for lead in water. Because the water is too corrosive. It has too much salt in it, and there was no plan to control the corrosion. Flint is the only city in America that I'm aware of who does not have a corrosion control plan in place.
Shortly after Edwards raised that issue at the press conference, Howard Croft, then Flint's director of public works, encountered a citizen visibly upset by the corrosion control issue.
Why did you think that was important in the first place, about corrosion? Why did you think that was important in the first place? I am angry that I am doing this stuff and drinking this water and doing this stuff, and I could die before my time. Why didn't y'all think about that? Answer that point-blank question.
I think I will be the one asking the DEQ that. I will be the one asking why did you believe with the engineering team there? Because that's we followed their guidance.
My name is Naira Sharif with the Coalition for Clean Water and the Flint Democracy Defense League. The MDEQ did nothing to ensure that treatment was properly planned, approved, or started when the switch took place. Because of this negligent act, there is a serious lead problem in the water in the city of Flint. We are in a public health crisis.
My name's Kurt Guyette. I'm an investigative reporter for the ACLU of Michigan. What we found is that the city and state did a number of things that skewed the results. On the day of that press conference, I also confronted Flint Public Works Director Howard Croft when he attempted to repeat the lie that Detroit kicked Flint off of its water system.
There was a termination made by DWSD.
Right. I have a letter from Darnell Early saying they had the option to enter into a new agreement, and they chose not to enter into that new agreement.
There were...
Correct? Is that correct?
I think there were negotiations on what it would look like, and I think those negotiations were not anything that would have benefited the city.
So the city chose not to stay with Detroit.
Well, again, once the contract was terminated, I think evaluations have gone on all the way up to the state level on what would the best course of action would be for the city of Flint, and that was the determination.
All the way to the governor's office?
All the way to the governor's office.
Croft's assertion was the first time the governor's office was implicated in the decision to switch to the Flint River. After Virginia Tech released its results, state officials continued to claim that the water was safe overall, but they began to talk about the issue of aging infrastructure. For example, on September 21st, the MDEQ's Brad Werfel told MLive, Flint's water supply presently meets all state and federal water quality standards, but added that homes with lead service connections and lead plumbing always have been imparting some part per billion of lead, which is a concern. Focusing attention on infrastructure was a way to avoid addressing the root of the crisis, which was the state's fateful decision to switch to the Flint River, and its subsequent move to not use corrosion control, a $100 per day expense. But those supposed savings led to unimaginable costs. On September 24th, a pediatrician from Flint's Hurley Medical Center, Dr. Hannah Atisha, released a study of thousands of health records. The study showed there was a direct link between the switch to the Flint River and the elevated blood lead levels of Flint children.
We looked at all children under the age of 5 years. We looked at their lead levels pre-switch, and then we looked at blood lead levels post-switch. For children 5 years and below, the percentage of children with elevated blood lead levels in Flint was 2.1%, and then post-switch, the percentage was 4%, so a doubling, and that was statistically significant.
Confronted with that evidence, the state launched yet another attack. A spokeswoman for Governor Rick Snyder wrote in an email that the Hurley data had been spliced and diced. The Michigan Department of Health and Human Services also jumped in, saying the state's data was not in line with Dr. Hannah Atisha's results. Those attempts to discredit Dr. Hannah Atisha's work quickly fell apart. The Detroit Free Press compared the state's data with Dr. Hannah Atisha's results and found that the state's own data showed that there was a higher percentage of kids in Flint with elevated lead levels in their blood after the switch. In fact, according to records obtained by Virginia Tech's Professor Edwards, the State Department of Health and Human Services had detected a significant spike in the lead blood levels of Flint children in the months immediately following the changeover.
Lead-free water now! Lead-free water now! Lead-free water now! Lead-free water!
Finally forced to take some action, the state held a press conference, one that Flint residents weren't allowed to attend. EPA warnings weren't enough. The Virginia Tech study wasn't enough. The Hurley study wasn't enough. State officials continued to deny the river's role in Flint's lead crisis.
Now, from my standpoint as director of the DEQ and our responsibility, whether the water comes from Detroit or whether the water comes from the Flint River, we still have the same issue.
Wrong. On October 7th, a panel of experts formed earlier in the year by Flint's former mayor and a previous emergency manager held just its third meeting. In a small conference room crowded with media, the experts recommended that Flint switch back to the Detroit system in order to protect its residents from further harm. On October 8th, 6 months after Leanne Walters learned that her child had lead poisoning, 8 months after the EPA began raising concerns, and 16 months after the river water began causing massive infrastructure damage and irreparable physical harm to residents, Governor Rick Snyder finally announced that he would allow Flint to return to the Detroit system. The governor also insisted that there was no reason to assign blame to the completely avoidable man-made disaster.
Again, this isn't about blaming anyone. Right now, I want to stay focused in on the solutions and taking action to solve the problems.
After the press conference, Snyder spokesperson Sarah Werfel provided a rambling response to a direct question. Was the governor's office involved in the decision to use the river in the first place?
Can you guys hang on a second?
Just one more question. Howard Croft, the director. One more question. Howard Croft, the director of Public Works for Flint, in a recent interview said the decision to switch to the Flint River came out of the governor's office.
I can't address that at all. In fact, because at the time, you go back to the history of this, of the community very much wanting to switch to a new water authority, making the switch, the Detroit Water and Sewer Department at the time back last spring saying, hey, we're going to cut you off.
That's a lie.
There were certain steps at the time that I can't speak to with all of that history, but I can't.
So you cannot, so you're saying this decision did not emanate from the governor's office?
You're saying that the governor's office was directly involved. I can't address that at all, no, as far as I know, because that's not accurate.
Well, you're a spokesman for the governor, correct?
Yes, I am.
So
that's why I'm talking to you right now.
So
thank you for
your
time.
So that's a yes or no question.
Snyder wasn't the only official saying there was no need to place blame. Darnell Early, now the emergency manager over Detroit Public Schools and the man who signed the letter rejecting Detroit's offer to keep selling water to Flint, echoed the governor's words.
But I don't want to focus on what happened back in 2013. I think it's important that we mobilize all resources that we can to fix the problem.
But all resources weren't being mobilized, prompting newly elected Flint Mayor Karen Weaver to declare a state of emergency.
I'm looking for help from the state, and we're looking for help from the federal government. I feel like we have no other option but to reach out and ask for help.
The Flint water crisis began to draw broad national and international media attention. On December 29th, a task force that Snyder had appointed in response to mounting pressure reported its initial findings from its investigation into the state's handling of the crisis. What is disturbing about the MDEQ's responses, the letter read, is their persistent tone of scorn and derision. In fact, the letter continued, the MDEQ seems to have been more determined to discredit the work of others who ultimately proved to be right than to pursue its own oversight responsibility. On the day that letter was issued, MDEQ Director Dan Wyant and his chief spokesperson, Brad Werfel, both resigned. 3 weeks after Mayor Weaver's state of emergency declaration, Governor Rick Snyder issued his own on January 5th, 2016, at last opening up the door to federal relief. By the time of the governor's State of the State address in January 2016, the people of Flint had been drinking water contaminated with lead for nearly 2 years. People in the city still couldn't drink the water.
Members of the Joint Convention, the Governor of the State of Michigan, Rick Snyder.
Tonight, I will address the crisis in Flint first and in depth. Let me walk you through the facts. Tonight, I'm releasing a comprehensive timeline of the steps we've taken and the actions underway to solve this crisis. First, this crisis began in the spring of 2013 when the Flint City Council voted 7-1 to buy water from the Karagandhi Water Authority, the KWA.
That vote had nothing to do with the decision to use the Flint River as the temporary water source for a city of 100,000 people.
Detroit Water and Sewer Department provided notice of termination effective 1 year later, and on April 25, 2014, Flint began to use water from the Flint River as an interim source.
What the governor leaves out is the fact that Detroit wanted to keep selling clean, safe water to Flint. The governor's comprehensive timeline also omits the fact that when the Flint City Council voted to return to the Detroit system in March 2015, Snyder's emergency manager overruled that vote, forcing the people of Flint to continue using poisonous water.
On September 28, 2015, I was first briefed on the potential scope and magnitude of the crisis. You deserve to know the truth, and I have a responsibility to tell the truth.
Governor Snyder has not yet testified under oath. But on February 3rd, 2016, Leanne Walters didn't hesitate to raise her hand and swear to tell the truth.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you will give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Let the record reflect that all witnesses answered in the affirmative.
In 2014, in a city with no democracy, forced under an emergency manager, handpicked by Governor Snyder, a decision was made to switch the water source without the proper testing and enforcement of regulation. The citizens in Flint were assured for 18 months that the water was safe. We fought the city and the state, saying there was something wrong, and we were dismissed. We conducted citizen-based samplings. We educated and distributed 300 samples equally throughout the city. We collected back 277 samples. All of this was done in a 3-week turnaround. There are people in Flint today still not being assisted during this crisis: immigrants, disabled, and shut-ins. Broken policy and procedures are smothering the outcry of an entire community suffering financially, physically, mentally, and emotionally. I urge you to help restore some of the trust lost by never allowing this to happen again.
As of today, 23 months after the switch to the Flint River, though it's been switched back, 5 officials have resigned and 1 has been fired because of their roles in the water crisis. The U.S. Department of Justice, the FBI, and the Michigan Attorney General's office have all launched criminal investigations. Congress continues to hold hearings. The ACLU of Michigan documentary Here's to Flint was produced by Kate Levy and Kurt Guyette. The film was narrated by Daryl Dawsey of the ACLU. Special thanks to Melissa Mays, Jen Teed, Leanne Walters, Antonio Cosme, Kayla Fenner, No Town the Movie, Spectacle TV, and All Points TV. If you'd like a copy of today's show, go to democracynow.org. When we